to Spinster Aunt. On this channel, I'm taking a deep dive into my family's genealogy. I've started with the English folks because, well, all the records are in English. So, if you are new here, you'll be learning some great tips for searching UK records for your ancestors, with my family as an example. Watching my previous episodes will help you put this story into context. Last time we talked about the life of Henry Charles Hiscocks, who spent most of his career working for the British monarchy. It was a familiar story of being overworked and underpaid, but also one of nearly 5 decades of steady employment and a pension. Let's take a look at how the siblings of Henry Charles fared in a series I'm calling From Somerset to the City. The parents of Henry Charles married in June of 1803. It was typical for couples at this time to have their first children within their first years of marriage. And if the wife survived childbirth, she would likely continue to have children into her early 40s. Martha is born and baptized in Frome, Somerset, the daughter of Charles and Elizabeth Hiscocks, in 1808. She's baptized in St. John's Church just like her younger siblings. We next find Martha in London, getting married to Edwin Trotman on July 16, 1826. Martha is just 18 years old. Edwin is a carpenter. It seems that Martha and Edwin are both from Frome, but neither of the witnesses at their wedding seem to be family members. Their daughter, Emma Lavinia Trotman, was born on February 14, 1828, in Mill End, Middlesex, a part of London. 18 months later, Martha's husband Edwin dies in July of 1829 at the age of 22 of unknown causes. The location of his death is listed as London, Surrey, and his residence was listed as Crucifix Lane. Emma is baptized in Southwark a few months later. Her baptismal record doesn't indicate that her father Edwin is deceased, but her residence is also listed as Crucifix Lane. I knew that some sort of tragedy had befallen them when I found a Martha Trotman and her infant daughter admitted to the workhouse at the Tower Hamlets in Stepney in March of 1830. Before being removed by the Poor Law removal orders, they were residing at Everett Street. Wisely, Martha spends only a couple of days in the workhouse. She takes Emma, who is 2 by this time, and tells the people in charge that she is headed back to Frome. We catch up with Martha again in 1837. She's back in London. By this time, we know that Henry Charles is living in London as well. On May 16, 1837, in Lambeth, Surrey, she marries Charles William Cater. Her new husband is a bookseller, as is Henry Charles at this time. Martha and Charles marry in St. John the Evangelist Church, the same church where she married Edwin Trotman 9 years earlier. She gives birth to a son, Charles William Henry Cater, in 1838. But tragedy strikes again. Her husband, Charles William Cater, dies in the spring of 1839. He is buried in East Clandon, Surrey, on the 22nd of March, 1839. In the 1841 census, we find Martha Cater residing with her 3-year-old son in Bethnal Green in Middlesex. Martha's 18-year-old sister Mary Ann resides with her, while her brother Stephen James and his wife Caroline reside next door. Martha's daughter Emma is residing at the Ladies' Charity School in Middlesex. Emma is 12 years old. The twice widowed Martha is just 33 years old. In 1843, Henry Charles Hiscocks begins work in the Master of the Horse Department at Buckingham Palace. I talked a little about the Master of the Horse in episode 1, and in the 3rd episode I listed all of the Masters of the Horse during the 44 years that Henry Charles worked at Buckingham Palace. On the 1851 census, we find Martha Cater working at Upton House, which is the home of George A.F. Child Villiers, Viscount Villiers, who is the heir to the Earl of Jersey. Viscount Villiers' wife is Julia Peel, the daughter of the British Prime Minister Sir Robert Peel, 2nd Baronet. In the same census, 1851, we find Martha Cater's son, Charles Henry William Cater, residing as a boarder with Eliza Fulcher, who runs a lodging house on Mill Street in Essex. Fulcher is the maiden name of Martha's sister-in-law, Mary, the wife of Henry Charles Hiscocks. This brings up genealogy lesson number 9, the fan club. It is a term coined by genealogist Elizabeth Shone Mills and stands for friends, associates, and neighbors. And these are folks you need to pay attention to in your genealogy research. I was able to identify Martha as a sibling because her kids popped up on census records with Henry Charles, and my curiosity necessitated that I figure out who they were, or I may have never found Martha. But it was discovering her working for Viscount Villiers that really demonstrated the importance of the fan club to me. I thought, how does a twice widowed single mom end up in Ratley, Warwickshire, working for a viscount? It was a mystery until I felt compelled to make a list of all the masters of the horse while Henry Charles was employed at Buckingham Palace, and I recognized the Earl of Jersey's last name, Child Villiers, and realized that Henry Charles likely played a role in securing Martha the position at Upton House, and Shirley was making sure her son was safe with another family member and going to school. Henry Charles's help to Martha didn't stop there. What has become of her daughter Emma Trotman? Well, on March 30th, 1851, Emma was living in the Royal Mews with her uncle Henry Charles and Aunt Mary while working as a dressmaker. But it is unlikely this is where she wanted to be, because in January of 1851, the banns of marriage had been called between Emma Trotman and a gentleman's son named Joseph Wilson. Time for a history break. Okay, so if you haven't read as many romance novels as I have, which admittedly forms nearly all of the basis for my understanding of 19th century British social structure, let me explain a few things. The British social hierarchy had the nobility at the very top and poor at the very bottom. The nobility, also known as aristocracy, was comprised of titled people, relatives of the aristocracy who didn't have titles themselves, and other wealthy folks. These people didn't have jobs. They didn't work for a living. They rented out their lands, they invested money, they didn't engage in trade. They held the majority of political and economic power because in order to vote or hold office, a man needed to own land. The landed gentry or gentleman farmers would be included in this class. The working class worked for their wages. They were tenant farmers or ran inns or taverns, or a tradesman like a blacksmith or a carpenter, or a laborer such as a leather courier, a wool stapler, or a baker. Servants and farm laborers were included in this group of working class people. At the very top of this working class group, or maybe the very bottom of the noble class, were professionals like doctors and lawyers. This group of people who had access to education but weren't landowners, they had jobs that mostly served the upper classes. Perhaps they were a third or a fourth son who didn't inherit and didn't want to become a clergyman, so they found themselves working for a living. During the Victorian era, the Industrial Revolution brought more opportunities for working class people to build their own businesses, be a factory manager, or other white-collar jobs. They weren't aristocracy, but they were much better off than the working class. This growing group would become known as middle class. And really, for the first time in British history, men were able to work their way up in society. And because they were able to purchase homes or perhaps even land, they were able to begin to wield a small piece of political power. The most successful of the emerging group could catapult themselves all the way to the upper class by their wealth alone. Researching the lives of family members during this time is fascinating. Finding who was able to take advantage of these societal changes and improve their station seems like it was certainly based on a lot of hard work, but also more than a little bit of luck. And honestly, staying alive. The one consistency I have found in 19th century Britain is tragic and unexplained early death. Which brings me back to Martha's daughter, Emma Trotman. So on January 5th, 12th, and 19th of 1851, the banns of marriage were called between Emma and a gentleman's son named Joseph Wilson at the St. Martin in the Fields in London. When couples were preparing to marry, they could do it by one of two ways, by license or by having the banns called. Both ways were designed to ensure that a couple was eligible to marry. Calling the marriage banns in the church for 3 consecutive Sundays allowed anyone who had a reason why the couple couldn't marry to come forward. Marriage by license required the groom to sign an allegation, a legal document stating his intention and that he was free to marry. It also stated that the bride had been given time to back out of the deal, and all was good that they could marry. Interesting, though, she didn't need to sign it. Prior to 1823, if a couple was marrying by license, a marriage bond was also required in addition to the allegation. This bond, usually with a family member serving as bondsman, forced a financial penalty on the groom if it was proven that the allegation was false and he was not free to marry. Rich people and aristocracy would throw in another level of paperwork, like marriage contracts, that would outline the amount of money or land a bride would bring as a dowry, or the amount of money that a groom's family would pay the bride's father because that piece of land would be the last piece of a crucial water meadow adjacent to their estate, or some such thing. One of the key components to all of these documents was that the bride didn't sign anything until it came to the marriage registry just after she was married. But Emma and Joe didn't get married. On the 1851 census, which was taken on March 30th, Emma is residing at the Royal Mews with Henry Charles and Mary, and Joseph Wilson, a gentleman's son and her betrothed, is residing, wait for it, as a lodger in the home of William and Mary Ann Rickards. William is a theatrical wig maker, and Joseph Wilson is a scene painter. These are theater people. And well, as we know during this time in history, theater people were definitely not upper class or middle class, maybe even viewed as the lower end of the working class. But they didn't care because they were theater people. Oh yeah, and Mary Ann Rickards, she's Mary Ann Hiscocks Rickards, Henry Charles and Martha's baby sister, all grown up, with a 2-year-old toddler named Henry William Rickards. There's one more family member residing in this household, 15-year-old James Poole, who is Mary Ann's nephew. He's there to learn how to be a wig maker and hairdresser for Mary Ann's husband, William. There's also a servant. This story just got a whole lot more complicated. It will take another episode to unravel Martha's story and that of her children and other descendants. Let's recap everyone's situation in 1851. Through all the ups and downs of Martha's life, it seems that Henry Charles and his wife Mary have remained steadfast and willing to help her and her family. As we know from our last episode, Henry Charles and Mary remain at Buckingham Palace until 1888. By 1851, Martha has buried 2 husbands, having had a child with each. While her children are near and in London, she's in Warwickshire working for the heir to the Earl of Jersey, Viscount Villiers. This seems to be a great job, but you have to wonder how much time she gets to spend with her children. My heart is a little bit broken for Martha's daughter, Emma Lavinia. Was she jilted at the altar? Research I haven't revealed yet showed me that Joseph Wilson was the son of a gentleman. I can't help but think that class differences may have ended this plan for marriage. Emma is essentially a partially orphaned daughter of a servant. Marrying a gentleman's son would significantly raise her station. And what about Joseph Wilson? Was he disinherited when his family found out about Emma? Was he forced to move in with Emma's family and work in the theater to earn a living? He must still be on good terms with Emma if he is living with her aunt and uncle. But still, so many questions. It would not have been unusual in 1851 for a 13-year-old boy like Martha's son Charles to be working for his keep rather than being in school. He is lucky to have an aunt with a relative with a boarding house. Even though he isn't with his mom, it seems there is a family-wide commitment to keep young Charles in school. Will he find himself as a member of the middle class? Tune in next time to Spinster Aunt.